Hey everybody, it's Justin here. I should have put the script up in front of the camera, which I will do now. Never mind, I lied. I will not do that. Um, how's everybody doing? This is Sonic Boom Live. It's a weekly news program that we put on um, for the game industry, I guess. Usually it's Eric and myself. Eric is not here today, so you get my dulcet tones telling you all about the latest game news. Both Eric and I are from the game industry. I worked at Harmonix for quite a long time, and if you like Rock Band, I had some part in that. So, cool. Anyways, we have a lot to say about the game industry, and we have some pretty interesting insights. So, if you like this sort of thing, if you want to have some insights in how the game industry operates, that's the kind of news that we cover. So, what we have been doing for the past, I don't know, year is covering about 3 news articles a day. Per program. And that program happens once a week, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube Live, only at this point. But the news articles we cover tend to be very much industry focused. Not just like, hey, there's a new game coming out. It's usually about, hey, there's some major industry trend or change or marketing move that may tell us more about how the industry is changing and progressing over time. Especially now, this whole game generation so far has been marked by quite a shift, not least of which is Microsoft kind of shifting into the game streaming service. But second of all is Chinese investment into our like lots of Western game studios, and kind of a shift in the development mentality that we see in game studios. The AAA game space has been much different than it has typically been, and it's almost like the PS3 era, the PS3, Xbox 360. There was kind of a shift towards online, and when that happened, I think a lot of game developers saw the opportunity to make these persistent online games that would give their games longer legs, and by that I mean making it so that games were less likely to be sold back as physical copies to game stores, which ate a lot of game studios' profits. So there's like a kind of shift in strategy in the way games were developed. We're kind of seeing this now, but instead of that sort of shift, what we're seeing is a shift away from one-off games, single-player experiences, to these massive multiplayer games that can pull in hundreds of millions of dollars per month if it ever catches on. And even those games that have been historically like that are beginning to evolve into what we see as the metaverse. So, lots of interesting things happening in the game industry. That's what we're going to talk about. So, if you like that sort of thing, catch us on YouTube Live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, or just about every Thursday, where you can catch our latest news highlights for the week. And then any other stuff that's going on, there's actually kind of a few interesting news articles, but I think the ones that we chose kind of to continue on this larger story of what's happening with the game industry. So other than that, we're still waiting on Sony to announce their big play date thing where they're going to show off a lot of what they've been working on, which we're not entirely in the dark about, but we don't know a ton about. Mostly their first-party games that they've been in development for years now. We've seen very little from that besides Spider-Man announcement for Wolverine, God of War, obviously, but beyond that, we have heard very little. So this might be a pretty big year for announcements from Sony. We're just waiting to hear what they are. Additionally, Sony PSVR 2. Which we know the specs of and everything else, but presumably this is going to be at a big announcement. We also have, let's see, I think TGS. Oh, I don't know actually the date of that. I think TGS is next week, or if not this weekend. We also have Disney's D23 that's coming up tomorrow, I believe. They're kicking it off with a big announcement over their interactive entertainment side of things. which I guess not everybody's aware, but Disney has kind of switched their strategy with making video games. I think they are in earnest seeing their properties as a vehicle to kind of push into interactive mediums. So they've been kind of going on this publishing strategy opposed to development strategy, where they work closely with top tier publishers to create IPs around their properties. In particular, they've been doing this with Marvel, with Marvel's Avengers from Ubisoft Montreal. No, I think it was Ubisoft Montreal, not Ubisoft Montreal. What am I saying? Eidos Montreal. But I could actually be wrong about that. It was Square Montreal at the very least, or was originally published under Square. I really want to say it was Eidos, but we also have Guardians of the Galaxy, which they did. And I'm probably flipping the studios around. So either way, that was developed under them, and these with Spider-Man and Wolverine giving that to Sony and Insomniac to develop those two games. There's more on the horizon, specifically with Star Wars. Star Wars have really kind of went hog wild with their IP. So there's a lot of games that are in development there that we haven't heard about. And they're also, I think, using Star Wars as a platform, like the games to sell this like next generation of Star Wars storytelling. Again, another rabbit hole. Go down briefly. Star Wars has usually taken place in the era that we know of with the Skywalker saga and everything else, before, during, and just slightly after with the like three generations, I guess. And about 2 years ago, they kicked off like a brand new initiative to tell a story about like much older Republic, even earlier than the Old Republic, I believe. So it takes place in like this ideal Jedi time period, and they're developing stories around that. And I think Quantic Dream's new Star Wars game takes place during that era. So yeah, there's lots to be heard about that. Keep your eye on that, because I think there's probably going to be some pretty interesting news that comes from that. But on for the news that we're actually talking about today. The three topics we will be going over will be talking about Callisto Protcol's studio lead, Glenn Schofield. He made some comments on Twitter about crunching that sparked some backlash. He since had to backpedal those claims, and I think he also pulled down the tweet. But it kind of sparked a conversation about what crunch is, and we've talked about it on this station or on this channel as well. But we'll talk about that at length as well. The next bit of information is Roblox has picked up a former Adobe VP to head up the Roblox studios. This is interesting because it says a lot about how Roblox is beginning to transform from like a weird, creative playground, I guess, that has really focused on Gen Zers and younger. So like that as a Gen Z platform, I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think they know that. But it's more about how that platform evolves into what they presume is probably going to be one of like a handful of metaverse entrants. Pulling on Adobe's VP is kind of indicative of what they plan to do with it. So we'll talk about that some more. And then the last bit of news will be Tencent's. Tencent has completed a $300 million purchase of not Ubisoft directly, but Ubisoft's general controlling group, which is called the Guillemot Brothers Limited. The Guillemot family, and specifically Yves, who is currently CEO of Ubisoft, their brothers kind of founded the company, and they still have quite a bit of say over how the company operates. Tencent, in a bid to possibly gain control of Ubisoft, has purchased basically a 50% share in their holdings. And not quite a premium for that matter. I think it was an 82% premium over like what it should have been valued at. So they made off with a lot of money. They took it, and now Tencent has like a 49.9% share in that company. It was less than 50%, so they wouldn't gain a controlling share compared to the rest of the brothers, but it's enough to gain some influence over Ubisoft as a whole. So those are the three topics we'll be talking about. If you like this sort of thing, it'll probably be about 45 minutes of me blabbing on. But if you have any comments or suggestions or anything to talk about, jump on in, ask questions. And if you like this sort of thing, like and check out some of the older videos. So on to the first topic. We have a discussion about Callisto Protocol's Glenn Schofield and his comments about crunch. Glenn Schofield, as you might know, is the former founder of Dead Space Studios, Sledgehammer Games, which was purchased by EA at some point or created within EA. Created the Dead Space games, and then eventually folded, I think, after Dead Space 3, in which EA basically just like disbanded the company. Schofield himself went off to do some other things, but the big thing is that he started his own studio a couple of years ago to create what we know now as Callisto Protocol. And it's kind of like a spiritual successor to Dead Space. Be a great game by all looks of it. It's kind of a massive undertaking. They're developing it on Unreal Engine 4 tech, but they've since modified a bunch of it as well to get the sort of performance they want out of it in visual details. It looks amazing. It's made a big splash when it was showed at the what do they call it? The end of year games festival that I'm blanking on the actual name of. Either way, he showed it off there. It's made a big wave, and it's kind of surprising because it's such a polished looking game. It's graphically impressive. It's got some pretty cool tech in it, but the first we saw of it was like last year, almost a year ago, and we are going to get a full-on game supposedly within the next month or so. All good news, especially for people who are fans of Dead Space. We basically get the spiritual successor of it very soon, plus a whole new Dead Space game anyway. Or not whole new, but a remake of the first one. Cool. But in order to get there, apparently Striking Distance Studios, which is the studios developing Callisto Protocol, has been undergoing crunch. And this is what has sparked the sort of backlash by the industry. Schofield on Twitter said, "We are working 6 to 7 days a week. Nobody's forcing us. Exhaustion, tired, COVID, but we're working. Bugs, glitches, performance fixes. One last pass, though. Audio. Or one last pass through audio. 12 to 15 hours a day. This is gaming." And those statements seem relatively innocuous. However, they are glorifying one of the uglier parts of the game industry, which is crunch. It's typically done, which is towards the end of a development timeline, basically to get cert done. And this is the mechanics of it is cert is what's done at the end of production. A game that's going to be released on PlayStation, Xbox, for Callisto Protocol. Those are the two platforms it's going to be on, plus Windows, I believe. It has to go through certification by both the companies, and there's a pre-cert phase where they usually work with a publisher that will review all the certification requirements from both Xbox and PlayStation, compare that against the game, flag anything that may be breaking the guidelines, and they have a choice to either fix it or appeal it through Microsoft or Sony, which it's a toss-up. You never know if it's actually going to get passed. From there, it goes, well, once the development's done, from there it goes directly to those companies where it gets certified in a bunch of different regions. So for Sony, the sort of top-down view of it is Sony Japan is the parent company, Sony America and Sony Europe also do certification. I'm not sure if they've added any since, maybe for Chinese or Indian market, but as of when I last worked in the game industry at length, those are the three you had to cert through. Um, each one will do a certification pass. Each one will come up with different violations of certification, and each one you have to appeal to, with Japan getting final say in whether or not it will get certified to get printed. So that's how it goes. But these steps means you have to, well before release, get certification done, address the cert violations either by appealing or fixing, and then getting into printing. And it has to happen about 2 months before the game actually ends up on shelves. Again, that timeline might change a little bit with digital distribution, but if you want physical discs, that's a timeline you have to stick to. So in order to hit that, you're usually on call and crunching along that time period to just make sure you are hitting the certification as necessary. And this is typically known as crunch. The bad part of it is basically when planning has gone off rails entirely, or the scope of the game totally broke. You have scope creep or any number of issues that contribute to crunch. You end up on this prolonged schedule of crunching. I don't think anybody in the industry is saying that there isn't a point in which crunch is necessary, usually within the last 2 weeks when you're trying to get certification done. But the big shame is when you have months of crunch to hit your deadlines. So Schofield's comments kind of glorify what is an ugly part of the industry, and kind of doesn't acknowledge that it's not the crunching that makes gaming. It's the talented teams that pour their heart and soul into making sure that people have games, to play, whatever the timeline is. And I think, regardless of whether or not they hit the deadlines that they initially set out to, it is the individuals that are contributing to making this something. And I think the industry as a whole has put a kind of spotlight on this because, in specific, the game industry, well, not just the game industry, but the game and entertainment industry tends to have these, sort of, I don't know the best way to say it, but you have these design leads that are passionate about their concept and their idea, and they tend to drive the teams to get to blow out scope and to get the best possible game in the amount of time that they can, while also hitting deadlines, which usually leads to this ridiculous crunch schedule. And I think this is what the industry has pushed back against Schofield on. So he followed up and has made statements that he says, anybody who knows me knows how passionate I am about the people I work with. Earlier, I tweeted how proud I was of the effort and hours the team has been putting in. This was wrong. We value passion and creativity, not long hours. I'm sorry for the team for coming across like this, which is a decent apology. It doesn't necessarily address the issues at hand, which is what contributes to crunch in the first place. And again, I think Schofield comes off as the visionary person. He has an idea for what kind of a horror game he wants to make. He delivers on it and creates, a great and imaginative horror titles. Arguably one of the best ever created, Dead Space, and pending what we might get out of Callisto Protcol. It's just the issue of how this gets done. And to break down what crunch really is it's basically at some point you set the scope of what the game's going to be and you develop towards that scope. However, you're supposed to be checking in on it frequently to go, what is the scope, what is the deadline, and if we time this out based off of how well the team is performing, are we actually going to hit this deadline, knowing that there's going to be about 2 weeks to a month of crunching to get our certification requirements done. When you have these creative visionaries, the scope tends never to get crunched. Instead, what ends up happening is people get crunched instead, and this is what kind of contributes to this long hours glorification of, we're really pushing the team to get this creative vision done. And I think as an industry, we need to push back on it, and as fans of gaming, we need to push back on what we expect of development teams. When a deadline is set, a year, 2 years before you actually will get the game, and we still hold them to that. And when like a studio does the right thing and says we're not going to we either have to break the scope, which is going to cause some issues with the quality of the game, or we're going to meet the scope and then push out the deadline. That's actually the right thing to do. Pushing out the deadline to not kill the development team with long hours and mentally exhausting timelines. This is what we should be expecting of game studios. And though it may just be disappointing to us if they push out the deadline, it really is at the benefit of the people who are generally unseen creating the games that we love. So this is basically sums up what has happened with the Glenn Schofield and why there's pushback. There's not much more to it. There's not anything to speculate on. I think, if anything, if they're still crunching today and they haven't met the gold, gotten a gold master disc, then we might see Callisto Protocol push its deadline out maybe by a couple of months into early January. If anybody has any questions about that, yeah, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic. If my connection hasn't dropped. No, it looks like it's okay. Next point. The next topic at hand is former Adobe VP is going to be heading to Roblox Studios. The crux of all this is the Adobe VP of Augmented Reality. His name is Stefano Corazza. He's stepping in to lead the Roblox studio as their new studio head. I think Roblox is generally ignored by the bigger gaming community, but especially under like young Gen Zers, it's a pretty big deal. And not only that, there's also not a very lucrative market, but there is a functional market that exists there where people are able to come in, create for Roblox, and be able to convert Robux to actual physical payment. This has been relatively successful. Their Roblox had been growing all the way. I mean, they're still growing up to this point, but they did see over the last year a 4% reduction in overall spending per person. But I think their user growth has still maintained, not to the same levels as it had like the 3 to 5 years prior to that, but they're still on a growth trajectory. And they also went public, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So all that has combined to make what is Roblox today. Roblox as a company is probably one of the 2 to 3 companies that are likely to launch what will become the metaverse. There's plenty of companies creating versions of the metaverse, but in reality, users are what going to drive the metaverse. And as of right now, Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite are probably proto metaverses. And the reason why is because A, it has the population on it, like 20 million plus users per month. Plus, it's got some sort of open creative platform. And all those creative platforms have kind of transitioned into some sort of functional market. Not a mature market, but a functional market. And these are the sort of like 3 pillars you need to be able to create the metaverse. In addition to all those things, the companies that run each of these different platforms have also openly explored how to take different gaming experiences and connect them together. Minecraft and Roblox already have those pieces in place. Fortnite, not quite, but they are opening up Fortnite to a version of the Unreal Engine and editor to allow open development on that platform. So all 3 of those things are coming for all 3 of those companies. What's interesting about this move by Roblox to pull in an Adobe VP is that I think this says a lot about how they plan to develop out their product. It's anyone's guess as to which one of these 3 companies will actually be the first to really turn what they have into an actual functional metaverse. But a move like this suggests a lot about how they will be doing it. Adobe is famously an open creation platform, and steps of theirs as of recent have also opened up marketplaces on their platform, by being able to sell assets and whatnot to creators on that platform, as well as modifications to it. So there's some parallels with the Adobe platform as in and of itself, but the bigger piece here is how to open up tools to allow more creativity to more people to basically build what will be like an open creative platform that allows users to basically drive the development of where the metaverse is going to be going. And Corazza says, my passion has always been democratizing the creation of stories, games, film, and immersive experiences. And I think that tells you what you need to know about where this is going. You'll hear the democratization of stuff a lot from tech companies, and it's basically the concept of taking the development and control of a platform out of the platform owners and giving it to the people to let them develop what will be the future of it. It's kind of like open sourcing, but Roblox will not become an open source platform as far as I know. It will probably still maintain its controlled platform, not least of which is because it appeals primarily to like people who are under 15, 16 right now, maybe a little bit older, but because of the young population there, they have to maintain some sort of controls over what content goes on there, and having a totally open platform means that bad faith actors could abuse it more than they currently are. So bringing someone from Adobe probably brings in a lot of experience about how to handle this as they want to open up the platform and kind of take down the walls that have made it a semi-walled garden. It doesn't say much about how they want to evolve the marketplace yet. They do have to do that. Their marketplace is still very closed, and it's basically Robux are paid to buy something that someone has developed. Those Robux have a conversion rate that's controlled by Roblox, and for all those reasons, it's kind of a controlled monetary system. It's not mature enough to actually handle what the metaverse will become, but it's important to note that that will be one of the key pieces for them to truly become a functional metaverse, where an in-world economy that more mirrors a real economy develops, opposed to one that has one of the key structures of an economy controlled specifically by Roblox setting the currency exchange values. So this should be an interesting space. Currently, the Roblox platform, the development platform itself, is Lua-based. And it, like I said before, it doesn't really offer the flexibility developers need, but at the same time, it also doesn't allow the accessibility that it also needs for people who aren't code savvy to develop their own things there. It's kind of like a code light structure. It's a pretty easy language, but it's still not like pick up and play like, say, PlayStation's Dreams product, which is like an entire UI UX based development platform. So interesting things to see there. I think everybody should be keeping an eye on what Roblox does, what Epic is doing with Fortnite, and what Microsoft is doing with Minecraft, because those are, in all likelihood, one of them will be the one to open up the gates on what a real metaverse is going to be. Cool. If anybody has any questions about that, feel free to shoot them now. Otherwise, I'll move right on to the third article of the day. All right, so article number 3 is Tencent, which we've talked about at length, I think, a couple weeks ago. They are completing a $300 million purchase of Ubisoft's controlling stock. What that means is that Ubisoft is kind of funny in the sense that it's publicly traded. I think it's publicly traded in the French market, although the Ubisoft might be actually traded in U.S. Markets. But on the French side of things, Guillemot Brothers Limited is a company that has basically managed the Guillemot money, and that is listed, but I don't think it's publicly traded per se. They are the original founders of Ubisoft. And Yves Guillemot still is the CEO of the company, Ubisoft. But the other brothers are in part involved in it because they own this company, Guillemot Brothers Limited, that owns like a sizable chunk of Ubisoft today, and it allows them to have significant say over how the company operates. They basically maintain this point where they do not want to cede power to other interests, and they want it to maintain independence, even though it is publicly traded. And they're doing that in a lot of clever ways by basically limiting who can buy what chunks of the company, so there's not a sizable ownership share. A few weeks ago, what happened was Tencent had talked about buying a sizable chunk of Ubisoft when Ubisoft was publicly stating that they were open to purchases. Maybe in a way to deal with the troubles they're having today, but also possibly putting them in position to either Sony or Microsoft, who have been like arming themselves with studio purchases to basically make their internal portfolio and library stronger. Microsoft is kind of an obvious case. Sony's kind of they're not in the habit of really purchasing big companies. They're in the habit of purchasing small companies and working with them to develop like strategies to create their quality bar of games. So Sony's an unlikely purchaser of Ubisoft, but Microsoft very much is, assuming that they don't get the Activision deal kicked out from underneath them in some way at least. So Tencent had suggested a couple weeks ago that they, instead of buying controlling stock or purchasing Ubisoft outright, they would in fact make an offer to the Guillemot Group to purchase shares of the company at an 82% premium over what they're actually valued at. And this had put in lots of speculation that the Guillemot Group would be bought out in full. The brothers would be basically dissolved of controlling stock, and Tencent would be put in place as one of the controlling owners of Ubisoft. What actually happened was some sort of deal was made where the Guillemot brothers only allowed 49.9% of the company to be sold for $300 million, which is just under half, so that they wouldn't have a majority, like Tencent wouldn't have a majority share in their company. And part of this was Tencent would get a 5% a controlling voice within the board of directors for that company. In turn, that has an impact on Ubisoft in a circuitous way. They currently own, I think, a 9% stock in the Guillemot Group has a 9% stock in Ubisoft. They still have a controlling voice in the company, and the Ubisoft themselves had opened up how much the Guillemot Group would be able to control Ubisoft. I think they bumped from a 5% stake to a 10% stake, allowing that to happen. This has given a good amount of money injection into Ubisoft directly, and they basically need it to maintain independence. The whole company has been struggling for what looks like about 2 years now with the sort of waning success of their core titles, primarily Assassin's Creed, in the Tom Clancy games, as well as Just Dance. Tom Clancy games being Rainbow Six and Splinter Cell, which hasn't seen a game in a very long time. So yeah, those three games have kind of been waning in their prominence and strength, and they really haven't been able to produce any new IP. Weirdly enough, they've announced a bunch, but none of their new IP has actually come to fruition. The biggest one is the sequel to Beyond Good and Evil, which has been in some sort of development limbo for like 5 years now. So this is the state of Ubisoft. They've greatly needed something to happen in order to save them. So what we will be getting is, I think it was on Saturday, the 10th of September, Ubisoft will be doing their big Assassin's Creed announcement, which will be announcing their newest game, potentially 2 games, but it will be this, the next game in the series, next to, I don't remember the name of the Viking game, the name of that one, but the last Assassin's Creed game. Rumors have been swirling about what the newest one is going to be. A lot of people suggest that it's going to be a return to form of the very first Assassin's Creed, which was much more smaller in scope, not like an open world where there's also RPG elements, but instead of like a more straightforward action game that focused on stealth, information gathering, and then pulling off like these kind of clever assassinations of targets. Supposedly, we're going to be returning to that, and it's going to take place in ancient modern day Iraq. If that makes sense. It's Baghdad before it was Iraq. It was before the British splitting of the Middle East. So yeah, we'll be focusing around that city, similar to how Assassin's Creed 1 focused primarily on, I believe it was Jerusalem, Istanbul, and one other city that I'm blanking on. But it focused on a bunch of ancient Middle Eastern cities. Period appropriate. So they're going to be doing a return to form there. The move by Tencent is kind of interesting because it helps bail out Ubisoft to some degree. It doesn't fix it entirely, but it does give them cash injection, which they need to help, further where Ubisoft is going to be in the future. What is kind of interesting is that on this news, Ubisoft stock sank 17% over the past day trading. In all likelihood, it was a correction. On all likelihood, since Ubisoft was talking about a purchase, and Tencent showing interest in it, the stock kind of inflated to some degree on the hopes that there would be some sort of buyout. And instead of a buyout actually happening, what we got instead was a investment to gain some controlling share by Tencent. And I think this is the most interesting part of it is what is Tencent's strategy? As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Tencent has been making sizable portions and controlling bids in a bunch of different game companies. Usually smaller game companies that are big but have been struggling in the near term and buying controlling shares in them. And this goes everything from Epic to Ubisoft. Riot Games, I think, is fully owned. They've upped ownership shares in a couple companies to the point where they've either gone straight out to a buyout or some other method. But from what we see so far is Tencent has not taken any other position than basically financially helping companies and allowing the leadership teams to be in place at least for a period of time. So it seems that on face value, Tencent is doing this as basically diversification of their portfolio. Tencent is a Chinese company, and in being so, they're not fully independent. The state itself of China, or the nation of China, has some sort of say in how the operations of Tencent goes, but they generally stay hands-off unless there's a point in which they come in, and those sort of events are not predictable. Case in point was Alibaba and the removal of Jack Ma as CEO, and that was a move by a Chinese company who was doing business in other companies, with China just taking a stance and saying, no, we're going to make a move that is going to change the way this company operates. The same could be done with Tencent, and as long as they play ball with the way China wants them to, it's not obvious that any sort of move like this has happened. But it's still something to be aware of, that a nation that does not hold democratic values and can basically take over or make significant changes to a company at any given time through basically decree is now owns significant chunks of a bunch of companies. Like I said, it may just be a move for Tencent to diversify itself and be able to move itself away from a Chinese-centric portfolio and business model into a place where they have an ability to pivot themselves as an international company and move away from China's being a Chinese national company when and if the time is necessary. Like I've said before, their ownership in other companies has not shown any significant impact on the way those companies operate. But that could always change at any given time, either by them moving their operations out of China or by China's government making a specific step that would change the way that they're operating. This isn't meant to be like Chinese phobic. It's just stating what is true about how the Chinese government operates and how their control over national companies exists. But I think the fear of like China coming in and going, we want all the data, or we want to control the companies that Tencent has invested in, is probably the unlikely scenario. What's more likely the scenario is that this allows these companies that have become very massive by focusing on the Chinese market and diversifying into Western markets, if there is ever a need for them to pivot and move out of the Chinese economy and Chinese markets, that they actually have a pathway to do this without tanking the function of the company in total. Basically what would happen in all likelihood is Tencent would split, and the operations in China would then become fully owned or partially owned by the Chinese government, and then their external investments would probably break off as some other group headquartered in Western Europe or the US or some other country like that, and then their original stock holdings and shares of those companies would then come under the control of our secondary company that no longer has to operate under the conditions that the Chinese government expects. And this is just something to keep an eye out for, especially as the global temperature of things change, particularly the geopolitical aspects of it. But these things could have pretty impactful shockwaves throughout the game industry, given how much these companies own of other companies. So something to keep an eye on. It's only speculative at this point. There's nothing specific that any of these companies have done to raise concern. It's more that what the Chinese government has done. So we'll see what happens. If anybody has any questions or comments on that, please feel free to chime in. And hopefully we'll hear more about what sort of evolves out of each of these stories as time goes on. If you like this type of content, like and subscribe. It does help us out. It helps us sort of gauge whether or not people actually enjoy this content. So hopefully we'll see more from you guys in the future. And again, 6 p.m. Thursdays. So we'll see you then. Take care, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. And enjoy the new press conferences that are going to be happening from Disney, Ubisoft, and TG.